Hello, welcome to Dav Chat for today. I'm Davina. My Twitter handle is davcat43, which is on the bottom left side of the page. There we go. I talk political commentary. Yes, I'm going to be discussing that Trump is a liar and a criminal. It's my theme song, and the reason for that is I'm fiercely protective of democracy, my children's futures, my own existence, and our ability to exist as a cohesive, mutually self-supporting society, and indeed as a species that needs the kind of flexibility offered by democracy in order to be able to best address the problems that beset us as a species: climate change, maintaining democracy against the incursions of wannabe dictators such as Trump, Mussolini, Hitler, etc. You name it, there's historical precedent for the kind of groupthink, cult creation activities done by fascist leaders who like to conflate patriotism and supporting them and viewing them as the sole answer to societal problems or perceived societal problems. So let's start with the trial today, civil case in which E. Jean Carroll, who's already succeeded in her first civil case against Trump, has now got this follow-up trial to determine damages for Trump defaming her after she went public with an incident that happened to her in the 90s, whereby a successful columnist, advice columnist, agony aunt columnist, and television personality, encountered Trump, also a personality, successful at money laundering, perhaps for various mobs, but in any case of sufficient positive high profile to engage the interest of E. Jean Carroll, who has said that she was flattered when he recognized her, was pleased to meet her, and invited her to help him choose a gift for his partner at the time, which I believe was Marla Maples. Subsequently, when being deposed for the first trial, Trump, when asked if he identified the woman in a photo, the woman was actually E. Jean Carroll, but Trump said that's Marla. He identified the woman as his wife, illustrating that E. Jean Carroll in the 90s was an attractive blonde woman with facial features that sufficiently resembled Marla Maples, Trump's then second wife. So let's go to an account of Erica Auden, a journalist reporting on the trial today. There was jury selection first up, and actually that was yesterday, the 16th, because today's the 17th. So these tweets, I've scrolled down a bit to what was done yesterday, and one of the prospective jurors, I'm reading from this journalist, who said she believed the 2020 presidential election was stolen, also said she hasn't been vaccinated against COVID. So it illustrates something that I think is important, which there is an erosion to the Trump voter demographic on two fronts. One, yes, there is some additional amount of illness, disability, and even death amongst that group of people who have put their health into greater jeopardy by refusing to take precautions against COVID and against severe COVID. Not to say that the vaccination is 100% guarantee you won't get severe COVID, but definitely some Trump supporters avoided those harm mitigation strategies, rejecting them because they didn't have 100% efficacy, and also using the same kind of contrarian energy that propelled them to support Trump in the first place. They have embraced contrarian health beliefs, so against vaccines, against avoiding crowded groups of people, against mask wearing, etc. So yes, one prospective juror. There were two prospective jurors who said they believed the 2020 presidential election was stolen, buying into Trump's big lie, as it were. And then So 2 said yes. Trump apparently turned around to see who had said yes. He wanted to see, what do they look like, the people who support me? I do remember aides to Trump describing that Trump was disappointed with the physical appearance of the rioters at the Capitol, who he had incited to attend the Capitol on January the 6th. I believe it was Cassidy Hutchinson who perhaps reported that Trump thought they looked trashy and was a bit disappointed in the physical appearance of his supporters, but it was also cold. He should accept that they were dressed warmly and also for committing acts of violence, as he had suggested with his sort of stochastic terroristic techniques, such as saying, be there, will be wild, and you have to fight for your country, and Mike Pence could have saved us, but he's not. The inflammatory tweets that Trump put out, even in the throes of the insurrection, of that the violent events of that day, when he was just trying to inflame his supporters to greater acts of violence. And those supporters did, some of them come within 40 feet of Mike Pence. He was being evacuated from the building, and the paths nearly bisected with the pathways of violent-minded supporters who had been pushed into believing that it was very necessary to fight for Trump, and conflated Trump with the country. I see Bob's here, and he's noting something sad, that his niece just got COVID for the 3rd time. She's a chef and has now lost her taste and smell, which is obviously very difficult for a chef to continue with their career if they can't test or taste the food that they're preparing, and they can't adjust seasonings. They don't have that biofeedback happening. Whew. So how are you doing, Bob? I'm sorry for your niece, but I hope you're well, apart from those things happening to your family members. And what else am I going to look through? I'm still going on with what the judge asked the jurors. And Judge Kaplan said, would you be unable to give both sides a fair trial and to decide this case solely on the basis of the evidence you hear during this trial and the instructions on the law that I give you? And 3 prospective jurors are excused after answering yes to that question. The judge also said to the prospective jurors that it has been determined already that Mr. Trump did sexually assault Ms. Carroll, that he knew when he made the statements about Ms. Carroll that those statements were false, that he made them with reckless disregard as to whether they were true or false. He also, this speaks to the levels of secrecy and protection that are required in order to participate in this extremely consequential civil case. He explains to prospective jurors that this will be an anonymous jury, meaning no one, including the parties, their lawyers, reporters, or even the judge, will know their real names. He also suggests they speak to each other using names other than their real ones. So they get to call each other, they get to adopt a persona. They'll be like, oh, I've always wanted to be called Olivia. I'm Olivia, and spend the days of the trial in that way, because it's so important to be anonymous. This is for protection against Trump and his minions, because an element of fascism is cultivating violence to counter the rule of law, to erode a society from within, to boast and display consequence-free existence, to lean into the loopholes in the law, but also just the inherent nature of legal proceedings and a justice system, which is that systems are slow and ponderous by nature. Someone without morals or standards is free to act fast, and they have that increased responsiveness. So sometimes people who get frustrated with the slowness of democracy and the compromises inherent in the practice of democracy, they can channel that frustration into a type of vulnerability to the rhetoric and the promises of a populist, fascist, aspiring dictator such as Trump. They can use that pain from cognitive dissonance if there's a gap between what they expect reality to be and how reality is manifesting itself. They can channel their disappointment that they haven't achieved what they want in their life into grievance territory, to resentment of any efforts to deliver justice towards historically and ongoing disadvantaged groups. So they can resent DEI initiatives. They can resent the idea that affirmative action exists, and they can be susceptible to believing outlandish things just because they hear them repeated a few times. Even when no evidence is provided, they'll believe that President Obama gave phones to refugees and asylum seekers. So prejudice and disappointment and hurt, if you don't weed those emotions regularly in your own emotional garden, it leaves you vulnerable to the bombastic promises of an exploitative, aspiring despot. So the jurors in the civil trial today have been vetted. If they thought that Trump had the election stolen from him, that democracy didn't work in 2020, they were excused from serving in this trial. And Trump turns around in his seat periodically to look at the prospective jurors. That's an intimidation tactic. We'll put that in the pile of fascist intimidation tactics that we ascribe to Trump. And now I'm going to switch topics to go to some election speculation. And Jonathan Martin, who I believe is also a journalist. Let's check Jonathan Martin. Yes, he's a senior political columnist for Politico. And his opinion is that the biggest general election news out of Iowa is the entrance poll, because 30% of the Republicans that turned up in the freezing cold to vote in that Iowa primary caucus, 30% of those polled said that felony convictions for Trump would be disqualifying, i.e. they would not vote for Trump if he was convicted of a felony. So he said, they may be Nikki voters now, but if those same soft Republicans in suburban Philadelphia, Mike, maybe he means Michigan? Anyway, if soft R's can't stomach Trump, it's the best news Biden has had in months. And they say, or no labels. Why would it be good news for no labels? It's good for Biden because it illustrates a fracturing of the Republican Party. In any given election, there are true believers who will vote for a candidate, and there are party loyalists who vote for a candidate. So they might not like them, but they'll hold their nose and go, I'm a Republican, I will vote for the Republican candidate. Trump is uniquely positioned in the degree to which he repels people even within his own party. So he very strongly repels Democrats. He's a great vote turner-outer for Democratic voters. They feel the urgency of the need to vote more. It helps shake off some of the demoralization and the apathy that can frequently afflict Democratic Party voters who suffer from knowing that the Electoral College system operates to devalue their votes if they are in bluer leaning cities within red states or purple states. So they can be discouraged from voting, but the existence of Trump as an obviously despotic, exploitative populist energizes some of those voters enough to shake off some of that malaise that afflicts people as a function of that demoralizing Electoral College system, which dilutes the potency of American democracy as a historic anachronism that panders to a historic device to protect the institution of slavery and the wealth and the property of people who participated in that system and benefited from it, whether directly or in an adjacent capacity. So the Electoral College allows certain states to have their votes count disproportionately to the actual number of people, and consequently dilutes the votes of people in more popular states like California. Bob's also saying his nephew in Massachusetts got his third case of COVID, and Holly's mum passed away on New Year's Eve, and the death certificate said from dementia. People with late-stage dementia can lose or have a degraded ability to coordinate their swallowing muscles, so they can sometimes die from aspiration pneumonia, from accidentally inhaling food into their trachea and their lungs instead of down their esophagus and into their stomach, because swallowing is a more complicated biological process than many people would understand intuitively, and so that might have impacted your mother-in-law, Holly's mum. Bob is saying, I think Haley will beat Trump in New Hampshire. She might not. New Hampshire is a bit of has more independents, more people who consider themselves to be loose cannons and not part of a cult. So it's a possibility. Either way, I think Trump is still likely to be the Republican candidate, and a lot of my thinking works around that idea, because he's the fascist, he's the cult leader, and it's difficult to deny the impact that a cult leader has on their followers. They are able to dismiss all evidence of his con artist nature. They've been encouraged to merge their identity with Trump. That's how fascism works. They use rhetoric such as, I'm doing this for you, I'm sacrificing for you. When they attack me, they're really trying to attack you. There's a lot of framing of how the world works that centers around the despot, that centers around making the despot the center of your world and your existence. So people that have chanced onto that path and found themselves involuntarily going deeper and deeper into that process of cult-like enmeshing their identity with Trump's, hard for them to be shaken out of it. I read an interview yesterday with a man who was an educated, university-educated man who had been propelled by his own ennui. He was dissatisfied with both parties. He was a third party type of person. He'd already uselessly voted for Nader in that year when Jeb Bush's brother, as the governor of Florida at the time, made a decision that benefited Jeb Bush as governor of Florida made a decision that benefited George Bush in the Florida Electoral College count. And the Supreme Court, conservative stacked Supreme Court at the time, handed that outcome essentially to George Bush. A Supreme Court aided heist, if you will, of that 2000 election, general election. So a bit egregious, quite egregious. Where was I going with that? Jeb Bush. I'm completely strayed from my original topic. Bob says, Trump as candidate is just crazy, but I'm not worried he doesn't stand a chance of winning. I'm glad you feel that, because it's important for people to feel energized, but also not so worried that they become demoralized, because again, that's a fascistic strategy to intimidate with violence and the threats of violence. And by being louder than like a pufferfish raising its spikes, like a bearded dragon expanding its beard frill, to appear larger than they are, to appear more dominant than they are, to create a false image of themselves as a moral majority in order to intimidate and dissuade other people from engaging in the democratic process, to make it feel like a Trump victory is inevitable. To be a little bit of a Thanos, I am inevitable about it. And the answer to Thanos saying I am inevitable is the teamwork and the unity of the Avengers, who, however beaten, however many knocks they take, continue to contradict Thanos to his face. So Thanos says, "I am inevitable." What does Tony Stark say in the movie? He says, "I am Iron Man." And it's an assertion of a different reality. You are not inevitable. I am something, and I will take action also. Oh, I have a little person that, can I block them? Oh no, I just had a bot offering to help promote my channel. So yes, Bob notes that he only got half the votes in Iowa, and Iowa's very representative of that rural-urban divide. And the more rural, white, elderly, conservative Christian, evangelical Christian you are, the more votes you get for Trump. But that's not more generally representative of the US as a whole. So even though the Electoral College panders to more elderly, white, conservative, evangelical people due to its initial construction as a counterweight to the modernizing force of the anti-slavery movement, modern America has diversified quite a lot. And the fascists have techniques and strategies to counter that multicultural, ethnic diversification, viewpoint diversification of America by cultivating little disinformation hotpots that prey on people's emotions, prey on their psychological vulnerabilities, try and tell them that Trump won't allow them to be religious, lean into their fears that, or their sense that they are losing cultural dominance, that Christianity is losing cultural dominance. And you can see those fears being pandered to and amplified by Republican senators such as Josh Hawley, who says America needs to be a Christian nation. Boebert says something similar. Boebert said she was sick of the separation of church and state. These people are all leaning into those fears that cause people to forget history, that there was solid reasons for the founders to advocate for the separation of church and state and to frame the Constitution in a way to encourage separation of church and state, that the massacres that arose from the adoption of religiosity within state governance, that the Huguenots were massacred, that Protestants versus Catholics led to huge wars where reason could not establish a solution because faith is separate to reason. So it was a way of trying to center rationality and decency within a government framework to protect the people from the excesses of irrational faith-based fervor and faith-based ideological fervor, such as we see with a lot of the pro-birth rhetoric, which ignores the medical reality for women, that miscarriages happen, that they can be complicated and difficult to deal with unless you have a legalistic framework that centers the woman's life, the life of the sentient birthing person, over the potential future existence of a fetus that could grow to a child, but may also die in the womb and be septic, induce sepsis in the woman who is pregnant and endanger her life. So Ireland had Dr. Savita Halappanavar, an Irish dentist of Indian ethnic background, who died as a result of failure to obtain an abortion in a hospital where, because of the failure to separate church and state, because of the presence of a strong influence from the Catholic Church that prioritized continuing fetal existence, meant that she could not obtain an abortion, even though the doctors were aware her fetus was dying, the fetus inside her was dying, it was becoming septic, and she was at risk of entering sepsis herself. And sepsis overtook her body, she died. She asked 3 times for a termination of this pregnancy, even though it was a wanted pregnancy. She wanted to have a child. Her life was stolen from her by that failure to separate church and state, failure to keep at bay the influence of the Catholic Church in medical matters to do with maintaining a woman's life. So no doctor worth their salt would say, oh, well, if we treat your health condition, that might endanger the life of the fetus, so we can't possibly save your life or act in a way that would maximize your chances of staying alive. No doctor worth their salt would do that. They've sworn an oath to protect life, but their ability to act rationally is shackled when religious influence is allowed to permeate the legal system. Mary Trump tweeted that the judge in New York had threatened to keep Trump out of the courtroom. This is true. We have the quotes up here from Erica Auden. Let's see what outlet she's a journalist with. She's at Politico as well. Okay, legal reporter. Kaplan threatened to kick Trump out of court after E. Jean Carroll's counsel complained again about Trump's commentary, because Trump is whispering to his lawyers in a way that's loud enough to be audible to E. Jean Carroll, calling her a liar and saying things like, oh, she's recovered her memory now. And it's audible to her. So it's another way of harassing her and violating the standards of the courtroom to do so, because you're not supposed to be able to whisper loudly enough for your negative, insulting remarks to be heard by the opposing party. So Judge Kaplan said, Mr. Trump has the right to be present here. That right can be forfeited. And he continued, Mr. Trump, I hope I don't have to consider excluding you from the trial. After Trump threw up his hands in the air and said, I would love it, Judge Kaplan continued, I know you would. I know you would. You just can't control yourself in this circumstance, apparently. Of course, Trump's motivation for controlling himself is low, because he is trying to sell a narrative to his followers that he's being persecuted and oppressed. So I'm sure Alina Hababa, his one of his lawyers, is acting with his approval or under his instruction when she has repeatedly asked the judge, even when he's already decided on the subject and proclaimed his decision. She repeatedly keeps asking for an adjournment tomorrow of the trial so that Trump can attend his mother-in-law's funeral. He's already said no, and he's already remarked on how it came to his attention that when Trump asked for the trial to be postponed before and said, I need to be free on this day because of my mother-in-law, Trump was then at a rally in New Hampshire at 7 p.m. that evening. So wasn't with his wife, wasn't doing anything with relation to his mother-in-law. He was campaigning. And he obviously wants to assert his special privileges and his special status as a former president, knowing that he'd even be pandering to the delusions of his supporters that he's the current president, that he never lost the election and that he's still the rightful president now. Just doing everything he can to push into the loopholes, to push into these spaces where people rely on the honor system. Wherever consequences are not enforced, there Trump will be trying to highlight that he's special and can get away with things because rules don't apply to him. And that's then something for his followers to get their dopamine hit from, that idea that if they are one with Trump, that he is them, they are him, he's doing things for them, he's like Jesus on the cross for them, and their destinies are bound together, that if he gets away with things and if rules don't apply with him, then they can be gleeful knowing that maybe there is a greater chance then that they can also get away with doing whatever they want without fear of being checked or encountering legal consequences that will stick, or without social consequences that they know the modern world might shun them for, i.e. being publicly racist or saying that they don't think there should be any mitigations made to Black Americans to offset the cumulative weight of years of discrimination, redlining practices by banks and government institutions. Even FEMA even now has been shown to still disproportionately give financial help to white Americans who have been impacted by disasters. There's lots of ways in which discrimination continues to have an impact, as well as the cumulative impact of anti-intergenerational wealth establishment. So in their heart of hearts, people who understand that there has been injustices meted out to Black Americans as a consequence of people wanting to avoid guilt and wanting to avoid repentance, or what's another word for repentance? Anything to illustrate that, yes, it was wrong to enslave people and benefit for years from their enforced labor and their enforced family separations and their suffering the physical pain of beatings and other things. Oh, Sheldon's here. Sheldon says, "Hi, Dav, you're looking great." Thank you, Sheldon. "I've suffered a serious heart attack and spent 34 days in hospital critical care, recovering at home. Happy New Year to you and your family." Well, I'm sorry to hear about the heart attack, Sheldon. My father had a heart attack last year also, a number of them, and he's also recovered. So I think he's more in the recovery, spent longer in the recovery stage than you. And I'll report, I hope this is cheerful to you, that he's doing really well. He's eating more vegetables and doing gentle exercise. So he's shown an improvement, and he's had heart stents put in and things, and his cardiologist is apparently happy with how he's doing. So I'm glad that you survived that heart attack and that you're mending with family. It's important to take it easy and to do the exercises gently as they allow you to do them, and just take great care of yourself. I'm so glad you're still with us, and I hope your brother is well too. That's all I have to say about that. Exercise is key. Yes, it's very inspiring to me to do regular exercise as well, to get that step count up. Oh, I have to do some more steps today. I will go soon, but Bob's question is, why doesn't Judge Kaplan throw him out of court? It's a delicate balance for the judge, because Trump is saying, "I would love that." He threw up his hands and said, "I would love that." And Judge Kaplan said, "I know you would." And the judge shows his understanding of the martyrdom complex that Trump will use being thrown out of court to feed into. So to be a successful despot, autocrat type person, you have to be a good storyteller. You have to be able to lean into details that you know will help paint a story for your followers. So getting thrown out of court, "Oh, look at me, I'm being persecuted." And to those who already feel sympathy for you, who already believe that you've been treated unfairly and have been the victim of theft of a whole election and each superseding indictment is merely evidence of further persecution, those people lap up details, physical details that are reported on. He got kicked out of court. Oh, that is evidence that what he says is true. And a lot of his supporters would have a hunger for that, because when you're lost to a cult, your brain is defending your own ego. So it processes information in a way to help you keep guilt at bay, to keep awareness of being wrong at bay. So they have a hunger for, they have an appetite for any little actual factual detail they can use to anchor their convictions on. Like, yes, see, I'm in the right. Trump is definitely being persecuted, as he says. They're trying to say there's all these facts about how he's a criminal and stole documents. Those are not real facts. Those are lies and distortions. But the real fact that I will cling to is that he was kicked out of court. And being kicked out of something is an injustice. He has the right to be in court. So they would never concede that he was kicked out of court for his misbehavior, they would be able to use that to cement their own conviction that Trump was wronged, and it continues to be wronged and harmed. Now, the good news is that other people have been woken up out of the cult because it was too much for them to maintain that fabric, to keep weaving details into that fabric of Trump's persecuted, and it's us patriots against the world. Everybody's against us. That just proves that we are in the right and we are warriors for a good cause. The interview I read with a former Trump supporter, he was a journalist. What's his name? I can possibly find that out. Dang it, I can't find it out right now. It'll take me a little moment. He said that it was hard for him to watch the Trump podium appearances every day during COVID because his understanding of science and disease made it hard for him to watch Trump sort of pull things out of his butt on a regular basis, and that he at least knew Trump had helped promote the development of vaccines, so he was on board with that. But then when Ron DeSantis went from encouraging people to get vaccines to suddenly saying, oh no, I need to do the dictator bit, I need to do the anti-establishment hero bit, and when Ron DeSantis took a stand and said vaccines can harm you, his world imploded, his worldview imploded a little bit, and that began the process of unraveling his commitment, his mental commitment to MAGA. So I'm trying to just find the name, because that man has founded an institution called Leaving MAGA. His name is Rich Logis, and the interview is called "I Cannot Believe How Wrong I Was: Redemption of an Ex-MAGA." So if you type that into Google, you might need the name Heidi Kuda as well. She's a former Fox reporter, and she is now very active in trying to disseminate truth, and she has a blog and a podcast and all manner of things. All right. So yes, Rich Logis, Logis, formed a group called Leaving MAGA. All right. And he describes at length in that interview with Heidi about his journey, and that it took him a year to disengage intellectually from all of the parts of his identity that he had allowed to be subsumed into the MAGA cult, whereby he took it on board that he was a warrior, and therefore Democrats weren't just the political opposition anymore. They were demonic. They were the enemy. They were anti-America and anti-everything decent and good. And he was part of this group of warriors for righteousness. And he says he woke up and had MAGA for breakfast, MAGA for lunch, and MAGA for dinner. He ate, slept, and breathed that because it was an all-consuming identity on his part. And he alienated a lot of people he'd previously been friends with, who'd helped him. And when he left MAGA and apologized, he said, I don't think that any of you have to accept my apology, but it's there. And he said everybody but one person was able to accept his apology, and some said, I knew you'd come back. I mean, there was never a guarantee, but luckily for him, he has made that return to reason and is trying to make amends by helping other people take that initiative to retrace their steps and unentangle their own identities from that cult of MAGA, whereby you suspend your own ability to assess evidence and reason, and you merely collect details that you can twist into support for your worldview and for your convictions that Trump is a hero, God, king who can do no wrong, and that those who support him are similarly blessed by God, or blessed as the true patriots, etc. Bob said he's a narcissistic psychopath, plain and simple. You follow a creator on TikTok who speaks about narcissism. True, although I like to look at Trump through a political lens and not just that medical pathologizing of his behaviors, because narcissism can serve a political end if you can draw people into it, if you can make people feel good because you extend that glow of we are great and we are on a path to greatness and you belong in this group as well. I did speak to a psychiatrist who described that phenomenon as shared omnipotence, I think. That idea that Trump feels all powerful when he can overturn expectations, violate social norms. It feels very empowering to be part of a movement with Trump at its head when he is in such significant violation of expectations and of legal standards as well. He was able to break so many norms and break so many laws that those who identify with him have two things. One, an outlet for all their grievance and disappointment, that they can say, yes, I'm not just a whiny baby. We as a group are being persecuted for our courageous and principled stand against the racist forces of diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. In that worldview where you're persecuted as a white person and it's a principled stand to say no to any help and no to any policy efforts to include Black Americans, to remove second-class citizen status from certain demographic groups, to uphold America's standards as a refuge for asylum seekers, for people fleeing their homes, to make the case that they would be responsible citizens here and that they have a genuine fear of death and destruction in their home countries. That type of compassion and understanding is rejected by many Republicans and many in the MAGA movement. And for them to be able to invert the social shame associated with that and to say, no, we are the true compassionate people. We are those who want help for veterans and help for Americans. And then you ask the Republican Party, what have you done to help veterans? And inevitably it's Trump taking credit for something initiated by Obama, or just Trump actively lying that he has a magnificent healthcare plan he's going to deliver to the American public in 2 more weeks at all stages. And yes. So Bob notes this argument that people think they're being left behind and they want what he's selling. And I'll note that it's still predominantly white people. And a lot of his supporters at the Capitol on the day of the insurrection were white people who were middle class, but often were middle class plus hard times. So white people who'd been successful as real estate agents, etc., but had problems with the IRS, who had perhaps defaulted on mortgages, who'd incurred business debt, and their sense of grievance and outrage about their personal failings or just personal misfortunes had increased their susceptibility to this strong man who promised bombastic promises to take care of them, to give them everything they want and need, because he's so amazing and can do anything. He can overcome roadblocks in the political system. He can overcome the congestion of the democratic process and the concessions and the delays, particularly when you have a willfully obstructive party like the rich people lobby group, the Republican Party, who purposefully step in to block policies that would benefit the American public, who purposely step in to block funding for the IRS when funding for the IRS exponentially has an amazing rate of return, in that a well-funded IRS is able to compel billionaires to end their tax avoidance practices and pay millions of dollars into the coffers of the American public, because government paid for things are not just taxpayer funded, they're billionaire taxpayer funded as well. So yes, it's the Republican politicians' job to demonize important societal institutions such as the IRS, to demonize the process of tax collection, and to feed that sense of grievance. And grievance cultivation from the right-wing media was so effective leading up to Trump that it helped create an environment that Trump could succeed within. Succeed to the extent of not even winning the popular vote, because he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in 2016, but he did win the Electoral College system, which is, again, a form of organizing democracy in a way that allows a thumb to be put on the scale for states with smaller populations, i.e. populations that have a disproportionately large agricultural background, where there's more acres of farming land than there are acres of dense housing for people. So and an inherited amount of farming land, an inherited worldview of the practices that supported farming profitability in the early stages of American growth, namely the practice of chattel slavery and importing and terrorizing Black people for the purpose of profiteering in an extremely malevolent way. And those who cannot reconcile themselves to the malevolence of that, the malignant nature of profiteering off the back of forced suffering and forced family separation and beatings and a skewed rule of law that doesn't recognize some humans as human. If you're unwilling to accept that as part of your history, and you need to cling to some mythic white history where white people have the God-given right to enslave others and profiteer off their suffering, then you carry that framing and that need to denigrate Black people and that need to open your eyes to any bad actions done by Black individuals and close your eyes to any excellence or decency on the part of Black individuals, and collectively degrade them. And so maintain your worldview that nothing you did was wrong, nothing your ancestors did was wrong. There was nothing wrong about the practices of wealth collection and wealth creation in the early days of American history, that was fine and dandy, and in fact maintains its status of almost mythic, rosy, moral righteousness because of the inherent worthiness of white people and the inherent badness of non-white people. Bob is noting that he is heartbroken about Palestine and Israel. It is heartbreaking. I will agree with you. Ukraine has to still hope and pray that Republicans will stop being so devoted to Putin's interests, because Republicans in the House have continued to block aid to Ukraine and Israel. It's hard. I've been chatting for so long, though, I can see my voice is a little tired. So I will go and drink some water and get my step count up. Thank you to Sheldon for dropping in today. Bob, thank you for your commentary. As lovely as always. And I hope to talk again someday soon. By calling out Trump's tactics of narrative construction, pointing out that he was bad for the economy when he was in office, even prior to his mishandling of a pandemic, an unfolding pandemic. He was kissing up to the president of China for the purposes of getting a Chinese signature on a trade deal that he intended to use to cover up the contractions of the manufacturing sector, which were a direct consequence of his trade war. His posturing phony strongman trade war that he initiated with China and other American trading partners that was causing a contraction of both the manufacturing and then the transport and storage sectors of the American economy, with negative implications for the American economy as a whole. And he was trying to undo some of that or cover that up by enacting a trade deal with China in December and January of 2020. January 2019, December 2019 and January 2020. So we're also still dealing with the impacts of Trump's willful exploitation of public health disinformation, that he pushed lies to the American public so that his voters would create roadblocks for effective management of the disease even after he left office, that there would be such persevering levels of resistance, pockets of such strong resistance to masking, to vaccinating, etc., that he would benefit from the contrarian energy of that in the election of 2020, and that residual effects of those actions he took to foster and foment contrarian beliefs. That wore a lot of people down, and it helped that narrative gain dominance in social spheres all over America, that people got tired of believing that COVID was actually a problem, as opposed to Trump supporters who believed that COVID was a plandemic. Many of them believed it was a fabricated reality meant only to turn people against Trump. And so that weaponized contrarianism, that weaponized resolve to not cooperate with health authorities and to contradict health authorities in public places, has definitely contributed to ongoing negative outcomes for America, also for people around the world. So Bob says, stay warm. I will endeavor to do so, Bob. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Stay smart, stay safe.